Parshas Korach. In this week's Parsha, Korach challenges the leadership of Moshe and Aaron. And he and his followers make the following claim. Rav lochem, it's enough for you. Ki chol ha'ida kulam kadoshim v'sochom Hashem. The entire congregation is holy, and God is among them. Umadua tisnaseu al kal Hashem. And why should you preside over the congregation of God? So the challenge, apparently, Korach's challenge is, what qualifies you to be a leader any more than anybody else? Everybody has an equal share of, let's call it Tselem Elokim, or that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is dwelling among them. So, but Chazal don't take Korach's challenge at face value. He clearly loses in the contest with Moshe, and Chazal say that he did a number of things which all point in apparently the same direction. First of all, there's a medrash Pliya, which says, Mara al Korach, it says, Vayikach Korach, Mara al Korach lachlok al Moshe. What did Korach see that he challenged Moshe? Para aduma ra'a. He saw a para aduma. So we have to ask ourselves, what connection does para aduma have to anything about Korach? It's not mentioned in the parsha. In addition, Rashi, based on a medrash, and the medrash more fully describes among the challenges of Korach, Va'adoso, and his congregation or his followers towards Moshe, was that he clothed them in blue, in talisos, in talis garments, made completely of tcheles. Now we know that tcheles has to be added to the fringes, to the tzitzis, a psil tcheles, a thread of tcheles. So he said, a talis which is kula tcheles, is it chayeves in tzitzis? If it's completely made of tcheles, is it obligated, or is there an obligation to put tcheles on the tzitzis? And Moshe said yes, and they mocked Moshe. And similarly, bayis malei sforim, a house or room that is filled with Sifrei Torah, so does it have to have a mezuza? And Moshe Rabbeinu said yes, and they mocked him for that as well. What's the underlying common thread here? It's characterized by Rabbi Elisha Prero as common sense. What is common sense? So we'll talk about that in a minute. But the common sense objection is consistent throughout, which is, first of all, para aduma. The Chazal point out that para aduma is paradigmatic of the anomaly or the difficulty to understand chukim, laws of the Torah, in which the afer of the paraduma, the ashes of the paraduma, can purify the person upon whom they're sprinkled, but they also cause tuma, cause spiritual defilement for the person who sprinkles them. And so that doesn't appear to, quote, make sense. Similarly, Korach's objections, if the whole point of psil tcheles, of a thread of tcheles, is to remind us, as the Gemara Menachos says, tcheles doma layam, yam doma l'rakia, rakia doma l'kisei hakavod, it's supposed to give us certain references ultimately to the kisei hakavod. It reminds us of the sea, and the sea looks like the heavens, and the heavens are like the kisei hakavod. So if it's supposed to trigger that kind of association, so certainly if the entire beged, if the entire cloth is made of tcheles, wouldn't it be similar? And also, if we say that a mezuza is supposed to protect the residents of a building, then certainly Sifrei Torah, which has what is written in the text that's written in a mezuzah, and more, and many more, so certainly that would afford that protection. So Rabbi Elisha Prero famously says that this was a common sense rebellion, which is a rebellion by people frequently associated with Balabatim, who aren't necessarily steeped in Torah, but think that because of their common sense, and they may have common sense, that they have an insight, and perhaps even a superior insight, to what the Torah actually requires. So this is the Rav. And he says that it's not just in the time of Korach, but we see it time and time again. People replacing the halachic expertise and authority of the schooled scholars with that of their own common sense. I would just like to add to this that it appears that what characterizes common sense is an ability to connect the dots in the absence of more extensive information. Some people are very good at that. You see this in business, you see it in game shows, where people can anticipate how dots are to be connected, even though they don't have the information. But they have intuition. Some people have very good intuition. But intuition rarely, if ever, is sufficient to replace expertise and knowledge. And if we read Rav Soloveitchik's words a little bit more deeply than simply calling it common sense, what we confront is a tendency of people who are familiar with issues, but not steeped in the learning behind the issues, to opine about matters that are subtle and require a deeper understanding of the totality of Jewish law and Jewish tradition. And some people will even argue, well, if something is not prohibited by Shulchan Aruch, for example, then it should be done, or it could be done. And that's not always the case. There is absolutely room for common sense. There's a necessity for common sense. Rav Gedalia Dov Schwartz, Zichrono Livracha, used to say that the most important chelik of Shulchan Aruch is the fifth chelik of Shulchan Aruch, which is one of seichel. But that's only after the first four chalakim of Shulchan Aruch. And we rely on common sense in a person who is as learned as could be in the area, and then has the ability, based on what we call the shikul hadas, his own personal evaluation, to come up with conclusions. But it's a very dangerous thing, especially for people who get their halachic exposure from articles, newspaper articles, or even journal articles, rather than being steeped in the sources and actually seeing them firsthand. Have a good Shabbos.